Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, and the subject is going to be mastering. This is a very simple, generic process for mastering, and obviously, there's no single answer to how to master final tracks. But I think the goal, regardless of the type of music in mastering, is to make something production ready. That it can be released to be listened to and to get the final details, particularly in terms of loudness and quality, to be, I don't want to say as best as it can be, but as close to what you imagine, I think is really what it is. Because this is all based on choices. What do you want it to sound like in terms of final quality? That's the question. Whatever the answer to that question is what you will do in mastering. I'm of the philosophy in mastering for the stuff that I do, which is mostly orchestral, and this will be an orchestral track, and we'll put that in the title so people know what you're getting into here. I'm of the opinion that you should do as little as possible in the final mastering. That's just my opinion for this kind of home procedure that we're doing here. There are professionals that's what they do. They do mixing and mastering, and there's some professionals that only do mastering. You can send your stuff out to be mastered by a third party. A lot of professional musicians do that just to make sure that they're getting exactly what they want in terms of product standard, right? The way things are done kind of universally. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making things good enough for yourself using the tools that you have. It does not matter what audio platform you're using. This is Audacity. Obviously, this is free and open source. I am a Linux user. I'm a Linux musician. I only use Linux and open source software and compatible Linux software. If you can get to the end, then the means are justified. And that's why I use open source Linux software. So while people are paying hundreds or thousands of dollars for subscription fees annually or for libraries and different types of platform software, I'm paying zero and instead investing in solutions, hackable solutions to get what I want. So I'm on Audacity. You can use Audacity to do professional level work. You just certainly can't collaborate with professional studios that use other tool sets. That's really the limitation. Otherwise, if you are your own chain beginning to end, you can do it here. But the techniques we're going to talk about can be applied anywhere. Again, this is not comprehensive. This is only my process, and this is just how I think. So this is the track. This is a film score track. This is to a film project. We're not going to talk about film projects right now, but there's an active project, so I can't really talk about the film itself or allude to it. It is a father-son sentimental sort of story, and this is a climactic moment. This is the raw audio, just the mix, and this has not been mastered. Let's listen to it so we know where we're starting from. Okay, so that's the raw mix. Okay, the first point that I want to make is that I think, at least following this procedure, and I think it's just a good idea no matter what you're doing, that your mix really be essentially finished, that it be done, that it be final, that your mix output be of a quality and of a care that could be released as is without any additional changes, at least in terms of the audio quality, the sound, the atmosphere of it. So that's what we have. Everything is where it's supposed to be. The equalization is balanced. It makes sense. It doesn't sound muddy or tinny or bassy. It sounds balanced out. The loudness is not too loud. The quiets are not too quiet. It is a clean render. Okay. That being said, as you look at the waveform, you see a few things that could be dealt with. There's a bass drum hit here, which is a bit of a climactic point. This is scored to picture. This is not a concert piece. It is actually scored to film, to picture. It's been written to picture. It wasn't created and then just slipped into the picture. It actually has timing to it. And this is a major moment. And this bass drum, it does not clip, but it does stand out from everything else. So you might want to deal with that and crunch that down. Otherwise, you can see that it is all pretty well balanced, right? You can see all the loud points are essentially the same, relatively the same. You can see the left and right channels where there's some variance at certain points between the left and right channels in terms of instrumentation being louder or softer. They are fairly well balanced from beginning to end. That's essential. You should mix first as if you don't need to master. Deal with everything in the mix that essentially makes it perfect. Our objective in mastering, in this case, my objective, and your objectives may be different, is simply to increase the loudness and maybe brighten up particularly the quiet moments a little bit. So we're going to use a parallel compression procedure. Now, parallel compression, a lot of people will apply parallel compression in the mix. They will apply the compression instrument by instrument prior to reverb, applying parallel compression, I keep saying progression, after the reverb can do some strange things to the reverb. I find that this isn't such a big deal. It does create a sort of a zoom in effect, right? Kind of, if you think about camera motion, a zooming in or a pulling of focus down to a macro level, down to a small level, or micro level, I should say. And it blows up those small, delicate moments of reverb and makes them much, much more apparent. I think that can be beneficial, particularly in film music, because you want the quiet moments not to be too quiet. You want them to be loud enough that they are heard and can stand their ground inside of the mix of the dialogue or other things that are happening in the music. So we do want to kind of bring the quiets a little closer to the louds here. And in doing so with a parallel compression, we're going to be boosting up even the reverb in a very artificial way. And that's okay. I might do a different kind. I might use just a more general compression procedure if I was mastering this as a concert type release. Okay, so the way I do this is just a couple of steps. Again, I don't want to do much to this. I want to do simple, just a couple of simple things to get this where I want it to be. And I also do this from reference. I've taken some tracks over time that I have mastered using online mastering tools, free online mastering tools, and I compare them in the waveform, and then I found a process that gets me very close to those desirable outcomes. I'm not really concerned about enveloping individual little parts. Again, I've already dealt with that in my mix. Now, I could incorporate some volume enveloping in my process here, but I'm not going to do that. I've already dealt with that in the mix. We're just doing some general filtering to the entire track to get it where we want it in terms of loudness and EQ. Okay, so let's take this first so that we have a reference later on. I'm just going to mix this down to a new track, and we'll actually edit this new one down here. We'll change our color just so we can keep it separate. And I'll mute the top one. We'll collapse it. So this is the one we're going to work with. We're going to select the track, and the first thing I want to do is prepare this for parallel compression by dealing with a couple of these outliers. The first thing I'm going to do is just do a generic compression. I'm going to go up here and go to compression, compressor, and I'm going to go to the factory preset. This is a very light default compression, and I find that default settings are very useful when doing mastering. You can always do it again and again and again and layer it up on itself to accomplish what you want, but it's a little bit harder to do it all at one time and try to hit the target in the center. So let's just compress this one time and we'll see what it does to our waveform. You can see that it does bring this down a little bit and it brings up everything else so that it's a little bit more balanced out. I do see that we still have a bit of a spike here. So what I might apply is a limiter. And again, I'm going to do a soft limiter of just 1 decibel, 1 dB. And just to try to shave off that little bit of extra here. And we'll apply that, and you see that it does get me pretty close. You can see that I have these other waveforms are spread out, these big climactic points over here. Up here, I'm touching the edge of 0. So that's it for now. What I'm going to do is make a duplicate of this track for my parallel compression, where I'm going to be adding a highly compressed track at a very low volume to this untouched just generally compressed and limited mix. Okay, so let's create another one. So here's my second one, and we'll solo this one. And what I want to do is apply a compression that will be extreme. So I have a preset for this. This is my parallel compression preset. You can see what my values are. Everything is pretty much pushed all the way to the end to give me this very, very stark, shallow curve. And you see what it does. It's going to turn this into just a big piece of sausage. It's just big, you know, it's all the way out, all the way to the end. I haven't clipped everything off. You see, I can still see some variations in wave pattern, but it is very loud all the way to the end. I'm not even going to play this so you can hear it. Now, I do want to see if there are any outlier effects that have happened. So what I'm going to do is just normalize this back to 0, and it doesn't change anything, so I haven't created any clipping anywhere. The next thing I'm going to do is brighten up the compressed line. Rather than add my EQ to the overall mix, again, I want to do very subtle things. Rather than EQ the overall mix, it's already mixed the way I like it. It already sounds good. I've just compressed it once, put a little limiter on it. I don't want to EQ all this. I'm just going to EQ this parallel compression side so that when it gets applied, the really quiet moments will be brighter. I'll hear more detail in close. And then the louder parts will still maintain the richness and warmth of the original mix. Okay, it'll automatically kind of crossfade those qualities. So I'm going to apply my EQ to the parallel compression line. If we come up here and I go to EQ, I'm going to apply a filter curve. And this is my preset for that. It's got kind of a mid scoop around 400 hertz. And then you can see it pushes the highs up, boosts the highs, and then boosts the lows with that scoop around the muddy tones. And this should brighten it up and also maintain kind of the very low rumbly frequencies as well at the same time. We'll apply that, and you see what it does. And now let's normalize this again to 0 just to make sure we haven't created any artifacts. You see there's one little artifact over here, and I'm going to deal with that using the limiter. Not a compressor, but a limiter. I just want to chop it off and just deal with that little spot that's kind of sticking out and get these other peaks to kind of line up at 0 a little bit better. So we'll come up here and we'll go to our limiter. And again, we'll apply 1 dB at a time. And I think that does pretty well. I might do one more. We'll apply one more limiter just to get all of these a little bit more balanced out, these high points. And now we're set to mix our original track with our parallel compression track. I, through process and elimination, have just found this for this my orchestral mix. You can kind of play around with this, but I am going to normalize this now down to negative 30 dB. Very, very small, and you can see where it takes me. Okay, so I have this kind of small, thin line of this parallel compression. And then I'm going to come up here to my original, my just compressed and slightly limited track. And I'm going to bring this down to normalize it to -5 to give me a ton of headroom. So now what you see is that we have the very soft moments of my regular channel is about 60-40, 40% being the parallel compressed channel. It's going to mix so that we hear a lot of this parallel compression line mixed in with the very softest moments. But when we get to the louder stuff, there won't be nearly as much influence. It will be there. It will be there, but it won't be nearly as much. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to mix them together. So mix and render this to a new track, and this is what I come up with. And I will solo this bottom one, and we'll collapse these other tracks. We don't need them anymore. You could delete them. This is a destructive process. Now what I want to do is normalize this out to 0, so I can see if it's created any additional artifacts we might need to deal with. I see that it actually looks quite good. I do want to get this part out here. I do have a section that's I know is very climactic. I want to be a little bit more prominent. There's a couple of thick string parts here that are kind of overbearing compared to this one. So what I might do is just apply a limiter. One more time, 1 dB. Not a compressor, because I don't want to compress this more. I've already applied my general compression to the main line. I've applied my parallel compression that's going to affect the small parts. I don't want to add another compressor at this point. I could also envelope this. I could just bring the louder parts down a little bit, the ones that are less desirable. But I'm just going to put a limiter on this and just shave off these very tips. And then we'll listen to this to make sure that we didn't create any kind of gaps or any kind of open holes in the sound where it sounds overly compressed, and certainly no clipping. And the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize this now to my final output. I tend to do a -0.5. Some people do a -1 dB. Some do as little as 0.35 on their final output, but you generally don't want it to be 0. You want to fill up the space, but you don't want it to go all the way to the edge. And now this should be ready. So let's do a little bit of a comparison. If we go up here to the top, we have our original track. We'll unmute here, and this is the original, and then this is the compressed track. Let's do some comparison. So I'll solo the original, and we'll play. Okay, so you can hear the results. You certainly get a lot bigger sound, a big, richer, fuller sound, particularly on the quiet parts. Brightening up that parallel compressed line and adding higher frequencies to it while maintaining the low and just cutting out the kind of the muddy mids. What you end up getting is a sound, particularly at the soft parts, where you can really hear the detail of the instruments. You can really hear the bow on the string in those samples in there. You can hear the grinding of the actual action of the bowing. You can hear the guitar resonance, right? You can hear even the ambient sound, like I said, of the reverb is kind of amplified and focused in on. So you get space. You get the sound of space in a very intimate level. So that's what I was after with that parallel compression. And I think this would be ready to go then to send to the filmmaker to be mixed in with the score. So that's just my process, my procedure for this type of music in this setting to do some very, very general tweaks in the mastering process just to get the right loudness, get the right equalized frequencies the way I want it to be, to bring out the elements that I want to hear a little bit clearer in the final output. Again, the process is up to you, but I recommend some general principles. First of all, again, make sure that your mix is production ready, essentially production ready, that everything you've done in the mixing side of it really you don't necessarily need to do anything to it. Second, have a goal in mind. What is it you want to accomplish in your mastering? Make sure that it's only a little bit of change, not something very major. Again, that should have been dealt with in the mix already. And then the last thing, take very small baby steps in accomplishing your goal. Make sure that you're applying effects subtly as you go through the procedure of mastering until you finally achieve what you want. You might even try a process where you apply the effects in small increments and then back it off once you are satisfied, just to kind of take a little bit of that extra edge off as you're mastering. So those are my thoughts on home mastering your own stuff, and using this parallel compression kind of procedure on a fully edited and mixed track. Good luck with that. Happy composing. Happy mixing.